Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Welcome. The topic this week is called Exposed, and the subtitle is When You Aren't Held by the One You Need. And I wrote about in the personal essay this week a number of experiences that I went through growing up in New York City. I spent the first really 12 years of my life as like a latchkey kid. Well, the first 4, my parents were together. When they split, certainly there were after school programs and all of that kind of thing. But when I got to be about 8, that is when I took over, sort of like, making my own lunch in the morning, taking the public bus in New York City. And this was common. This was not, an unusual set of circumstances. A lot of my friends rode the public buses and packed their own lunches. It's a whole different world of parenting today. But growing up in New York City has its own certain set of, circumstances that you're dealing with. It's a lot of people in a compressed amount of space, and there is a lot of beauty that arises out of that. Certainly, New York City forever for me will kind of like live in my bones, and I love going back to visit. When I go back, it's like no time has passed. One of the most comforting things for me is just walking through the streets of New York City or walking through Central Park. There's something incredibly soothing about that. So I loved growing up in New York City. There's so much art. There's just, so much culture, so much energy. And I think that you really understand without even being taught that there are amazing people, and there are, people who are really not well, and they come in every shape, color, size imaginable, So it just teaches you without even needing to be taught that the world is just full of all kinds of different people, and none of it is based on, some of the things like that we can see just by looking at the cover of the book. It's not race, gender, anything. It's just there are great people in the world, and there are people that you probably don't want to invite over for dinner, and that is one of the things that I most love about the experience of growing up in the city is the diversity and the energy. And as I was growing up, I thought I'll never live anywhere else. And so there's that. And I grew up on the Upper West Side. Both my mom's house and my dad's house are on the Upper West Side. I went to school, elementary school on the Upper West Side. My ballet school was on the Upper West Side. I was just an Upper West Side kid. And the experiences that I had along the way were mostly great growing up in New York. But as I began to get older and I was spending more time on my own, there were certainly some things that began to happen. And I wrote about a few of them. I did not write about all of them. So one of them in 3rd grade, my whole art class from elementary school, we went to Central Park. We went to Central Park, and we were supposed to go draw a tree. And my best friend at the time, Karen, and I went, and we found a tree. We thought it was beautiful. We had our sketchbooks and our colored pencils, and we started sketching this tree, and we were really supposed to make it our own and not be afraid to be creative with the trees. They were sketching and looking down, and then looking up at the tree and looking down, and we were supposed to be taking inspiration from what we saw. And then I don't know, the 4th or 5th time we both looked up, there was a man standing there with his pants down, and I wrote about it. He was it was very scary and confusing for us. And so he was masturbating. So we jumped up and ran to find the teacher. We didn't know what we were looking, we didn't know what we were dealing with. We had no idea. We were 8. There's no context for that. And we left, the whole class left. I remember that. But I don't remember any kind of conversation as a class. I don't remember Karen and I, talking to anyone. There wasn't really a big deal made about it. It was just sort of like, okay, this strange thing happened and we all left and moved on. And I don't recall any kind of conversation at home about it. It just was like a blip, like a thing that happened. But those blips started to happen more and more frequently as time went on. And I did not write about this in the essay, but I was mugged when I think I was between 7 and 8. I was wearing a necklace that my mother's ex-boyfriend had given her before she met my stepdad. And it was like a gold rope necklace, and these 2 boys on a bike came up to me and asked me for the time, and I said I wasn't wearing a watch, but I knew it was about 3:15 because I had just gotten off the bus from camp. And as I was having that conversation, one of them just reached over and yanked the necklace off of my neck, and they took off on the bike. So I had some experiences. And then another thing that I was writing about yesterday was just being on a public bus when I was 11, and this man across the way, I just happened to look up and we made eye contact, and then he kind of looked down at his lap, and I did what you do, right? Like I followed, and there he was exposing himself, and I looked back up at him like shocked, and he smiled at me in this really awful way, like we had shared a secret, kind of a vibe. And I remember feeling so shocked and almost like embarrassed that I had been part of that interaction, even though it certainly wasn't by choice, and wasn't anything that I wanted. It's still, I had inadvertently participated. And I just remember this feeling of like almost shame. And I didn't say anything to any of the grown-ups around me because I didn't even know what to say, or, I certainly wasn't, it was so uncomfortable, and I felt so embarrassed that I wouldn't have even had words to say what had happened. So things like that were occurring. There was another day that I was walking up West End Avenue, and this car was coming around the corner really slowly. Right as I got to the crosswalk, the guy was driving with his window open, and as he drove by, like I looked in the car just like as you do, and he was totally like exposed and, playing with himself and smiling at me. So just a lot of that kind of really unfortunate, unwelcome, events going on, violations, right? It's a visual violation, and I didn't know where to put those or what to do with that. And my mother really didn't, she told me, I do remember that she told me about an experience she had when she was about 16 in Jersey City, where she grew up. And my mother's father was a police officer. He died when she was 13, but her mother worked in the precinct. She answered the phones. And so my mother was washing the car outside the house, and this man drove by, and he slowed down when he saw her, and he asked her for directions, which she leaned in and gave him. And then he drove by again, and he drove by a third time, and the third time he drove by, he had his pants down. And my mother was so upset. She raced inside and called the precinct. Her mother answered the phone, and like 20 cop cars chase this guy down. They got him. So, I didn't have like that sort of, I didn't have that kind of backup. I didn't have anyone. She was not available. I don't know if she just didn't know what to say or what to do. I don't know if she felt helpless in the face of that. She was, up until the time that she met my stepdad when I was 7, they got married when I was 8. She was doing the single mom thing, and there wasn't going to be a way for her to be with me all the time. She was working. And so I think maybe some part of her, and then even after she met him, there's just a point in time when you have children that, they're going to go off into the world, and they have to be able to get themselves to school and get themselves home. And even if you're in New York City. So I think part of her felt helpless. Like, there's really nothing, there's no way I can protect her from this. But there was no conversation. And I think that is what I really desperately needed from her, was some kind of like sisterhood kind of feeling, or mother to daughter conversation about, what to do about this type of interaction, or where to put it, or how to think about it, or how to understand it. I just did not have that. She didn't do that with me. I don't think she was able to do that with me. And so when I was 13, and I had this experience that I wrote about this week, I was heading to my ballet class, which was a safe place for me. I loved it there. It was like my third home. I had my mom's house, my dad's house. I felt very safe at school, and I had ballet. And dancing is somewhere for me that I'd always sort of moved through my emotions. Even as a tiny, I started when I was 4, and I didn't stop until I was 16. And that's another story for another day. But I had always had this as an outlet. And so I was heading to my class, and I was a street smart kid. I had been through enough like really crappy experiences by then to understand you got to keep your eyes open. You can't be daydreaming. Like, you got to really pay attention and be alert and be aware of your surroundings. And so I saw this man. I saw him somewhere in my awareness. I was, I knew that he had looked at me, but it was very quick. It was really just a glance. And then he started veering toward the ballet studio. Now, I knew most of the dancers. I didn't know everybody, as a kid. I was 13, and the older dancers who were in the company, they were like celebrities, like you didn't talk to them. But I knew everyone. I knew most of the people walking in and out of that building. Now, I couldn't tell you for sure if there were any other businesses in that building. I don't know, because I only went to the one place. And you would open the door, and there was almost instantly, it was a tiny vestibule, and then almost instantly a very steep, narrow staircase going up. And at the top of the staircase to the right were the doors to the New York City Ballet. And there were multiple studios, giant locker room, pianos in every room. And I can still see it. When you would walk right into the right, it was a little office, and it was it was a wonderful space. And it wasn't beautiful. It was really, it was kind of like, run down in a way, but like no one cared because the dancers were amazing. And the studio space, all you need is a really good wood floor, the mirrors, the bar, and the piano, and they had all of that. And so I knew that place like the back of my hand, and I did not recognize this man. And I remember feeling concerned, a little bit, or just noticing him and feeling like he seemed out of place. But I sort of talked myself out of it because he had arrived at the door ahead of me. And in my 13-year-old mind, I thought, well, he got here first. He's clearly going somewhere. And he had opened the door and he had walked in. And so I talked myself out of that gut feeling that something is off here. And once I was in the vestibule, he was walking up the left side of the stairwell, but he was going slowly, and it felt off to me. and I felt like he was aware of me there. And so I started to kind of slowly walk up the stairs behind him, but I just wasn't feeling, I just wanted to get away from him. And so I thought, I'm just going to run. I'm going to run up the stairs. And so I started running up the stairs, and literally, like, as soon as I passed him, he grabbed me. He got behind me, he grabbed me, he was really strong. He put his right arm around my waist, and he put his left hand over my mouth, and he pulled me right up against his body. And, I was in the state you would be in as a 13-year-old kid in that situation. I froze, and my heart, I could still almost like feel that fear and the taste in my mouth. I had a taste in my mouth. It was so strange. It was like tinny, almost like pennies. And just my heart pounding and feeling like totally frozen, which is, I imagine how prey feels, right? Like when the predator grabs the prey and pins them down or whatever. I imagine that must be what it feels like, which is just an awful, awful feeling of feeling frozen, knowing you're in danger, and just not being able to move, speak, think, nothing. And so I was frozen, and I felt him, I could feel that he was pushing something up against the back of my leg. And again, I'm a 13-year-old kid, so I don't have like any experience, but I knew something not good was happening. And he said right into my ear, "Just don't move, okay?" And I think that is what like woke up my brain, because it was phrased as a question. Just don't move, okay? And the question made me understand, wait, like, I have choices right now. I'm not going to just stand here. Like, I'm not going to just not move. I'm going to fight. And so I bit his hand as hard as I could, and I elbowed him as hard as I could, and I broke away from him. And but a minute had transpired where I was frozen, I think. And I got away from him, and I spun around because I did not want to have my back to him. And I fell sort of backward onto the stairs, and I started crawling backward up the stairs. But I remember his face, and he looked shocked. He looked as terrified as I felt. He was then frozen. And I was screaming, and crying, no, answering the question, just don't move, okay? Like, no, I will not just not move, and backing up the stairs and just hysterical. I mean, it was just hysterical. And he watched me for, I got another sort of like third of the way up the stairs before he finally turned around and fled. He ran down the stairs and out the door. And I remember continuing to back up the stairs until I saw that door close. I was not going to turn my back on him again. And so as soon as the door closed, I then stood up and ran into the studio and burst through the doors. And there happened to be 3 dancers there, 2 male dancers and one of the female dancers. And I had no words, I was so beside myself, but I was, hysterically crying. And I pointed and I said, "A man," and they knew instantly. And the guys took off, and the female dancer instantly came over to me, put her arms around me, sat down next to me, was just holding on to me and telling me you're okay, you're safe, you're okay, And she clearly knew. And she clearly knew because she had had her own experiences. And that's the reality, is that this sort of feeling of powerlessness was, I think, pretty rampant for girls and women in New York City at that time, and maybe everywhere, and maybe for all of time. I don't know. I only know, I can only speak confidently about my own experience. So other people would have to chime in for me to know for sure. But I think that what ended up happening is the male dancers, they were gone for about 10 minutes. They came back, they were both out of breath, and they had taken off in different directions, trying to see if they were going to find a man who was running. And they had not. And so they came back, and I was clearly still having like a nervous system, adrenaline just coursing through me and shaking and trying to I calm down and know that I'm okay now and I'm safe. And so the question became, well, let's call your mom and so she can come and get you. You're definitely not going to walk home by yourself after that. And so they did call my mom. Now, I had been home after school and dropped off my bag and gotten changed. This was like my regular routine. And my mom had been home with my brother. So that was still a pretty new experience. Prior to my brother's birth, my mother was always working, and I would come home to the apartment on my own. And so after he was born, she was there. And there was a point in time for a couple of years where she was just home with my brother. Like that's what she was doing. And eventually she got her real estate license, and she became a very successful real estate broker. But at this time she was home, and so that was really comforting and felt special and exciting. All I ever wanted was to spend time with my mother and to have her love and to have her affection and to have her approval. That's what I longed for more than anything else in life. It was that. And so they called her. Now, when I had gone home to change, my brother was napping. He was 2. So I knew that. And so they called her, and one of the male dancers called her, and he was explaining, and he was being very sensitive about it, but he was telling her, a man grabbed your daughter in the stairwell. She's okay, but it was very scary. He did put his hand over her mouth. He did, he explained to her what had happened. And then he said, we wanted to let you know, obviously she should not walk home alone. And then there was like a pause in the conversation, and he said, "Oh, I see. Okay." And then he cupped the phone and he said, "Your mom can't come right now. Do you want me to walk you home, or do you want to stay and take class, or what would you like to do?" And I did see the dancers kind of exchange glances that seemed to me they were about sort of the fact that my mother wasn't coming. And I recall feeling really let down, really wanting her to be there and wanting that comfort. But I knew that even if I went home, she just was not the kind of mom who was going to put her arms around me and tell me I was okay and I was safe. That just wasn't going to happen. I'd had enough experiences to know that that is not what was going to happen. And so I decided it's going to be more comforting for me to stay and take class and just, just stay here and try to just take the class and do something that felt familiar and, see if I could sort of dance through these feelings and come out the other side of class, just feeling a lot calmer. And classes were 90 minutes, 2 hours, sometimes depending on the teacher and what the practice was going to be and all of that. So I do remember the class. I remember shaking through most of it. I remember my teacher being enormously kind to me. And I then remember one of those male dancers walking me all the way home after, and all the way into the building and up the elevator and to the front door of my mother's house. And I remember her thanking him, and and off he went. And I went in, and my brother was awake, and he came toddling toward me, and that felt good. And my mother was very much like, you know, are you all right? And I said, I think I'm all right. And there wasn't any sort of tell me exactly what happened. I think I did kind of give her the details of what had happened, but it wasn't because she didn't ask me. And I remember some conversation about filing a police report and her deciding that we were not doing that. I do remember being able to describe this man. I had seen him. We were staring at each other for quite a while, and I don't know, but I think that she felt that was going to be more. She didn't want to dwell on these things. These were not things that she wanted to. I think she thought he's never going to be found. There's no point. Now, for me, later, like sitting and talking about this now, I'm like devastated that there wasn't a police report. And, the thought that this man may have gone on to do that to like many other kids is just, it's devastating. Though I will say that this is part of what I want to get to later, but the look on his face he looked so horrified. He definitely did not leave the scene feeling excited or, empowered. Like that was not it. Like he fled. And I'm sure partly he was scared of getting caught. But I don't think it was just that. I think that there is this thing that we can do where we other people, where we sort of put people outside the circle of humanity. And I don't know, I don't know if that's what he had done with me, if I was just girl, young kid. I don't know. But I imagine that may have factored in to his experience. And I don't know if he thought I was just going to freeze the whole time and then he was going to take off. I don't know if he had prior experiences and other kids in that position had frozen the entire time or what, but I know, or maybe this was I don't know. I'll never know. But he looked shocked and he looked horrified. And I think watching me crawl up the stairs, just screaming like, no, and just crying. And I'm sure I looked absolutely scared for my life because that's how I felt. I think all of that landed. I don't know if it made any difference. I don't know what happened to him after that. I hope that he got help. I hope that he got help. And that is part of what I want to talk about later. But the bigger issue, I think, for me, that was certainly a really traumatic and scary, upsetting event. But the fact that my mother didn't come, I think, is the thing that really stood out for me and stands out for me even as a grown woman and a mother myself. There's just no scenario where either of my kids could be in any kind of dealing with any kind of event like that I wouldn't be. Wild horses could not keep me away. So it is really hard to fathom that her decision in that moment was to, and I don't even know, I just assumed that my brother was still napping and she didn't want to wake him. But even so, that is it's just an unthinkable decision. That's the moment where you certainly wake up your 2-year-old and you take off and you go, and you're there. But she didn't, and she wasn't. And even when I came home, there just wasn't a lot of that mothering that was going to happen. And I just don't think she had it in her. I don't think it was not available to her. I think that for my mother, she did not like to dwell on the things that she had no control over. And if she couldn't control something, that was incredibly upsetting for her. And her whole thing was like wanting everything to kind of look perfect on the outside. She was the kind of person, if you were over, for coffee or something and you would get up to go to the bathroom, she'd go fluff your pillow, your couch pillow while you were gone. She was just very, she'd yank on the couch. Like she liked everything to be like perfect, including me. I was supposed to look right. And the house needed to look right. And when we would do Christmas card pictures, that became like a bigger and bigger thing every year, a bigger and bigger event. Everyone had to look perfect and the scene had to be perfect. And so she was very focused on how things looked and how things seemed. And if they looked right and they looked perfect, then she could live with that. And so I think she didn't have anywhere to put these events. She didn't have any resources to help me. She didn't want to, dwell on this kind of awful thing that had happened. She didn't want me to dwell on it. So I didn't have anywhere to sort of work through any of that. I just had to kind of try to work through these experiences myself and make sense of them. And how do you make sense of that as a child? How do you make sense of that as an 8-year-old or an 11-year-old or a 13-year-old or, I'm sorry to say, a 14, 15, 16, 18? Like, it never stopped, like these events. This was a big one, and this was a physical, experience that was terrifying, but it wasn't the last one of those that I had, and it was not uncommon. And there was no discussion. There certainly wasn't any like therapy. There wasn't any like what there would be today, right? Like today, they'd be like, okay, what are all the resources? What are the books I need to read? Like, what do we do? How can I, how do I help? What do I do, right? There just wasn't any of that. And so I ended up feeling like I wasn't really sure where to put that and how to feel about that, except to know that there were certain people on the streets that, you had to really watch out. And did it make me, afraid? I went out with my friends, I still did things. It did not deter me. It was normalized in this strange way. This behavior of men, certain men, not all men, it was normalized. I don't think the men, I think they understood it wasn't normal because they were actively trying to hide it. It wasn't like they were just, like it was hidden. But I had another experience in an elevator, and it's sort of like I fell for the same thing twice in a way, because I was with my best friend this time again, Karen, and we had my brother and one of my mom's best friend's sons with us, and the kids were toddlers, and we had taken them to Riverside Park. It was snowing, and so we had like toboggans for them, and we had taken them and we built a snowman. I mean, they were little. They were like probably 3. This happened after the ballet stairwell experience. And so we had dragged them on their toboggans back from the park. They were tired, but they were having fun. They were all bundled up in like the, New York, right? Like the onesie down thing where the kids are kind of like unable to really move, and the mittens and the hat and the adorable. And we like pulled them home, and there was a man who arrived at the same time we did, and he held the door open for us so we could like get into the inner lobby. And I knew I was not, if somebody did not have a key or they weren't buzzed in, they were not supposed to come into the main lobby. That was not supposed to happen. And he had gone to buzz the buzzer. So I thought, okay, he's buzzed his friend, and they just haven't buzzed back yet. So I opened the door, and he again held the door open, and we got in. We thanked him. We were thanking him. Oh, thank you. And then he went to the elevator, and he held that door open, and we piled in. And we were on the second floor, thankfully. So as soon as we got in, I hit 2, he hit 3. And no sooner did the door close than he pulled his pants down and whipped it, and Karen and I were screaming, the kids were screaming. Like, luckily we only went up the one floor and raced off the elevator, and he actually got off the elevator and went down the back stairs, and I was pounding on the door of my house, and my mother came running, and Karen and I were both hysterical and screaming, and my mother did take off after this guy in her socks, and ran out onto the street that way, but he was gone. So it's not like she didn't care. And when she, in that instance, it was brought right to her doorstep. She acted. She tried, but he was gone. And again, there was no real sort of like, sit down, let's talk about this. Are you okay? It just wasn't. It was like, okay, we're going to have some hot chocolate. Like, I tried to get the guy, some men are just sick, like that kind of a thing, and we're moving on. And so that's just like how it went. And I think the whole time what I was longing for was somewhere to put all that, somewhere to talk about it, woman to woman, girl to woman, mother to daughter, like some framework to have that conversation about what was happening, because it wasn't normal, and it wasn't okay, and it wasn't acceptable, and it was traumatizing, and it did make me feel like I'm just being thrown to the wolves, kind of like I'm on my own to navigate whatever may happen when I walk out the door. There isn't any way to be safe from this or to avoid this, so I just have to kind of figure it out for myself. And it also made me feel, as a girl growing up in the culture, like I don't have any power here. I'm just like prey. And if anything happens, like unless it happens in public view, I'm kind of on my own to figure it out. So it's not a good feeling, it's not a good feeling growing up in that sort of like unspoken circumstance where you're just, you're not really safe, and that if something happens, no big deal is going to be made of it. And there were all the other things going on in my childhood at the same time. My mother's drinking and my father's womanizing, and there just wasn't any place for me. And my father, by the way, I'd walk down the street with him, and I would watch him and listen to him objectify women left and right. I mean, it was common. It was not, and that was my dad, and he then did it to me when I became a teenager. He liked for men to think we were a couple. So it was just, the messaging was very, very clear and not positive. It took me a long time to kind of understand my power, in the world, and to not feel like walking prey. Again, it didn't stop me from going out. It didn't stop me from doing really stupid things sometimes, like teenagers do. You think you're invincible and you're with a group of your friends, like you think nothing can happen. It didn't stop me, but I was aware of it. And it did, on top of all the other reasons that I had to sort of question my value and question whether I was lovable or worthwhile, or, it did not help any of that. It really made me feel, I just wasn't sure what my place was in the world, or, how to handle all that. And I think when you are a girl or a woman, growing up in that kind of environment. And again, I can only speak to the environment I grew up in. I don't know how it was growing up in other places. But you don't have that mom person in your corner kind of helping you make sense of things. I mean, these are conversations I have had to have with my 14-year-old. I have already had to say, like, look, I really hope none of these things happen because, kids, this is what happens. They get to be teenagers. I have a 14-year-old and an almost 17-year-old, and they want independence. And of course, they should have it, right? They need to feel autonomy, and they need to feel trust, that you trust them and that they are able to go do things with their friends. And I've already been trained in this for a few years because of my son. He was first, he's older. And so I'm already used to this, but now I've got Devin coming up right behind, right behind Dylan. And I do have a different fear, I absolutely do. And because my almost 17-year-old son can take care of himself. I mean, obviously anything can happen to anyone at any time, and that's a very devastating thing as a parent, as a human being, to have to deal with. It doesn't matter who you are. Terrible things can happen to any of us anytime. And I know nobody likes to think about that. I certainly do not dwell on, I do everything in my power to keep my children safe, but it's a ridiculous world in many ways. It's a ridiculous world in many ways. And school shootings and all of the things, I've been through all this stuff with my kids. My son called me from a lockdown, at the beginning of the year last year. Like I've had all of these absolutely insane experiences because we continue to not do what we need to do as a culture and a society to make our children safe. And that is it. Like, there's really no argument. Like that's the reality, and the example that I'm sharing from my own childhood is one aspect of that. It's the same creature. It's the same negligence. It's the same, I'm going to look the other way, or I'm going to hope that it's going to be okay, or I'm going to, so that is a really tough thing as a parent to have to wrap your head around, that there comes a point in time where it does not matter what you do. You can homeschool, you can do all the things, it, even at a grocery store, it's just, there isn't anywhere that horrible things can't happen. And even if something horrible like that doesn't happen, there are other things that can happen, like a tree can fall on you. I mean, there's no way this is part of being human, is the vulnerability that is inherent in the experience. And it really is so uncomfortable and heartbreaking and infuriating to think about as a parent, but really for anyone, whether you're a parent or not, just for humanity, that we are not doing more to be safe with ourselves and be safe with each other. And part of what I wanted to, and what I do want to veer into today, is that. So I can look back at that whole experience, and there's still more to kind of unravel and dive into. And these are things that I'm writing about in the memoir, this whole sort of idea of sisterhood or motherhood or mother-daughter, just having someone in my corner. All I needed from my mom was to be there and to be able to have the uncomfortable conversations and to be able to look me in the eye and say, this is outrageous and it's not okay, and no man should be doing any of the things that are happening. And I don't know what I can do, other than be here for you and talk to you and hold you when horrible things happen, and, maybe get you in a self-defense class. That would have been something maybe proactive that could have happened. But just her being there with me and naming it and being a safe place to go and feel loved and protected would have been enough for me. But she couldn't do it. And I can look back on this, even though it's really hard as a parent to imagine not running out the door in a situation like this. I can still have a lot of empathy for her because I know that she loved me. My mother had her own traumas that she lived through. Her dad died when she was 13. Her mom, her mom passed away when she was 28. I had to do the math there for a minute. And, she wasn't the kind of person to ask for help, to get help, to go to therapy. She just was not, that was not who she was. And so I think she had nowhere to put all of those experiences. I know she and her mother were very close. So I imagine moving through her father's death, she had a lot of support. Her mother, she described as her best friend, but she didn't do that with me. I don't know why she couldn't do that with me, but she just couldn't do that with me. She wasn't capable. So I now, as a grown woman, can look at the situation and say, I don't totally understand why she couldn't do it, but I know that she couldn't do it. Like I can recognize that it wasn't a lack of loving me, it was a lack of being able to overcome her own stuff and show up. And I do have empathy for her, and I do love her still, always. And I do forgive her, for her flaws. Now, you don't have to, forgiveness is an interesting topic. Sometimes people get really upset when I talk about forgiveness or I write about it. I've had people, or when I teach a workshop or on a retreat, if I talk about this concept of forgiveness, sometimes people really do. They get very upset. Like, certain things are unforgivable, and I'm fine. This really awful thing happened, but I'm okay. But I don't want that person in my life. And if I forgive them, then it's like I'm saying it's okay. Like, what they did is okay. And so I've had these conversations. I understand, and email exchanges, and I understand that sometimes, our definitions of things can vary. And so for me, forgiveness is never about saying, this thing that happened, is okay. It's okay that you did this. It's not okay that this man grabbed me in a stairwell. That's not okay. That will never be okay. And it's, let's dial it back a little bit. It's okay that my mom didn't come. It doesn't mean it's not okay that my mom didn't come. Rather, it doesn't, forgiving her doesn't mean that I'm saying it's okay that you didn't come to the ballet studio. It means that I'm saying I can recognize that something in you did not allow you to do the correct thing and show up. And I can put it in that context and in that framework, and not be holding on to it, not be angry with you about it any longer. I'm not angry with her, and that's something maybe I'll get into on another day. It's certainly something I'm writing about in the memoirs. Just this place that we got to, at the end of her life. And my mother held on. I will just share that with you. She held on to sort of being right and trying to make everything look right until she was on her deathbed. That is what it took for her when she was just absolutely suffering and had nothing left. That is when she finally let that go and realized oh, wait a minute, you really love me, I've really prevented us from being close with my drinking and my rage, but you're still here and you're still showing up and you love me. That's never been the issue. I think my mother, for a long time, because I wouldn't just do what she wanted me to do and be who she, be how she wanted me to be, because I would not just go along with the fantasy that she was a really great mom to me all the time, because she wasn't, but she wanted me to behave as though she was. And I think she felt like I did my best. I did my best, and I want some gratitude for that. And I had gratitude for it, but I also had a lot of pain and a lot of things I had to work through because of it. So we just struggled, because I would keep saying to her, it's the drinking, Mom. The drinking is the problem. That's what, needs to be addressed, and then we can be closer. But right now, while you're actively drinking, and I never know when the Chardonnay is coming out, that's never going to be okay for me. And she did not want to hear that. Again, she was not somebody who liked to have that kind of conversation or confrontation or exploration. She just was not going to go there. And she was determined. And if you pushed it, you were banished from the kingdom. And so that is very much what I experienced for, my whole childhood and beyond. Even my adulthood with her became so much about boundaries, and that will be a topic for another day. How do you love people who are so incredibly entrenched in being right, or who are addicts, or who are, just absolutely refuse to engage in any kind of conversation or be accountable in any way? How can you love people like that? That's definitely like a whole topic unto itself. I want to get back to this idea of empathy and forgiveness, and even like radical empathy, which is sort of you hear this phrase now, a radical acceptance or radical forgiveness. And the idea, for me at least, when I think about that, is, can I even understand that that man in the stairwell was not well? He was not okay. And is there any possibility that I can have some empathy for him? And the answer is yes, I can now. And this is partly why I wish there had been a place for me to have this kind of conversation as a kid, just a context, as something, a framework to talk about these things, because clearly he's deeply unwell person who needed a serious help. But I saw his face, so I know that he was horrified by what he had done. I know it. And so, can there be any empathy? Now, look, anyone who has the impetus to hurt a child in any way needs to be stopped and needs help instantly. There is no, I don't want to be misunderstood. Anyone who has any inclination to do anything to a child or anyone needs to be stopped and helped instantly. That is, just to be super, super clear, that is where I'm coming from. Part of what brought all of this to mind this week is that I got into a very bizarre exchange, as sometimes can happen over the internet. And I was talking about, I don't know how many of you have read about the prison system in the United States, but it is pretty atrocious. Just Google, is the prison system in the United States humane? And you can just read and read and read, or you could watch the film 13th, or you could watch True Justice, Bryan Stevenson. Somebody's sending me big hugs. Yes. There's a lot of, I know this might feel like, wait, why are we talking about the prison system now? But just bear with me for a minute. So there's a lot of information out there about what is happening. And this is just one example of, the inhumane ways we can treat each other. So in the United States in particular, the prison system is just, it's just absolutely like nowhere you would ever want to end up. That's for sure. And nowhere you would ever want anyone you care about to end up. And it's so easy to say, well, just don't do anything wrong, don't break the law, and you won't. Well, you know what? There's about 1 million documentaries on Netflix about people who were wrongfully imprisoned for like 20 years. And then it turns out, oops, they didn't do it. There's a ton of those. Like, if you're looking for something to watch, there's plenty of that to see. So there's that instance, right? There's the person who's wrongfully accused before DNA evidence, or they're just wrongfully accused even now. And they're in there, and they're in the same system as the people who did do it, right? Let's go back a minute and talk about the people who did do it. Probably, likely, some of those people were kids at the time that they made these horrendous mistakes. That kids that were that fell through the cracks. That's how people talk about it all the time. Kids that we did not, as a culture, scoop up and pull out of the environment and say, this kid's in trouble, this kid needs help. Very likely, the people who are, many of them, a huge percentage of them who are in the prison system, did not have that kind of support. And so, there they are. So the question is, in other countries, right, the prison system is not like it is here. It's big business here. They're private prisons where, prisoners are working for free. There's a lot. Like, honestly, you can go and sort of do a deep dive into this if you so choose. But or you can believe me because I've done it. But it's not humane. And there are other countries where a prison system, their whole thing is like rehabilitation. How do we rehabilitate this person? And in old cultures from like way, way, way back, when we were living more like in tribes, that if somebody did something that was, not right, the whole tribe would get together. The person would stand in the middle. I might start crying. The person would stand in the middle of the circle, and every member of the tribe would go around and talk about what they loved about this person. Memories they had. Do you remember when you were this? Or I remember this time that they would just shower this person with love. And what would happen is the person would feel deeply horrified by what they had done. Usually that's what would happen. Now, of course, there are people who are going to be outside of that kind of help, who are going to be so mentally unwell that, or completely lack empathy, or have such horrific experiences as babies and toddlers and small children that the only way that they could survive was to dissociate and to, not attach properly. And those people very often lack empathy. They just can't, they don't feel it. So there's always going to be people who fall outside no matter how much you want to help or whatever it is you want to do. It's going to be, the most challenging cases. But there is no sense of trying to rehabilitate in our prison system. And so what happened is I got into this conversation over the internet, which, believe me, I've been through a million of these. I know when to try and when not to try, but I don't want to have hope stamped out of me. And I don't want to feel like, okay, the world is on fire and there's nothing we can do and we're totally divided and we just can't speak to each other anymore. There's no hope for conversation anymore. I don't want to get to that place where I feel that defeated by what I'm seeing. And so here's what I'm getting to, radical empathy, right? Is this idea that we can have empathy even for people who completely insult our hearts by the way that they're living and the things that they're saying and doing, right? And that is advanced. That is some advanced empathy right there, where you can, say to yourself, the things that are coming out of this person's mouth, the way they're living their life, the things they believe are absolutely reprehensible to me on every level, and yet I'm going to try not to other them. I'm going to try not to say they're not even human, because the minute we dehumanize people, we can do anything to them. The minute we decide this isn't even a person anymore, then all bets are off, right? It doesn't matter. We can do whatever we want. There's a lot of othering that is happening in our world right now, as we all know. And so this idea of trying, right, of not giving up, even if someone totally disagrees with you. And so that's what happened. So I got into this conversation on the internet about the prison system, and I said, there is no doubt that the conditions are inhumane. There are people in the prison system who are only allowed out 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, out of a tiny cell. They're only allowed out 2 hours a day, 3 times a week. There's no human contact. There's no, they're living in isolation. And basically, this person that I got into the interaction with was focused on a specific person who had just gone to prison, and sort of celebrating the fact that this person was talking about the conditions in prison and how horrible they were. And he was celebrating that this person who's now behind bars and having this like horrible experience, he was celebrating that because he can't stand this person, can't stand what he stands for, the way he's living, et cetera, and so on. Now, I'm no fan of this person who's been imprisoned, and, that's the facts. But I still feel everyone in the prison system deserves empathy and humanity and basic human decency. I still believe that. Everyone. Otherwise, there's no hope. Otherwise, those people are just in there and we're just like, yep, that's where they belong. Hands off. Don't care what's happening to them. And so that's the conversation that I got into on the internet. And this man that I was like engaging with, I blocked him, by the way. But, he said to me, clearly you are, I'm just trying to remember this because it was so funny, a right-wing paid influencer. And I mean, almost nothing could be further from the truth, like absolutely none of those things are true. And it was just that I was holding on to the hope that I might be able to have a nuanced conversation with a stranger on the internet and get him to see that all people, no matter how reprehensible you find them, and I happen to agree with him that this person that he was talking about is not someone there's nothing about this person that like is a yes for me that I can see. And I do think that he is exactly where he belongs right now because he broke some serious laws, but I still feel that even people who have done the most reprehensible things should be treated with some basic decency and humanity. I still believe that. And I think if we lose that belief, then hope is lost for us. And that, if you can wrap your head around that idea, then it's kind of a little, then talking about something like my mother, not being able to show up in these emotional, meaningful ways, like it's, extending empathy becomes, of course I'm going to extend empathy. And the guy in the stairwell, even though I desperately hope he was stopped, he was helped, I would never want him near another child again, ever, I can still have empathy. It does not mean like my mother not showing up for me is okay, or what he did is okay, or what anyone anywhere has done is okay if it's caused harm to someone else. It's not okay. And people that are really not well need help and they need to be stopped. But that doesn't mean that we have to other them and dehumanize them. Now, obviously, I think for most people listening to the story that I told this week, it's easy to not dehumanize my mother. She's just a person. She's clearly like flawed and had some stuff in her way. So I don't think anybody would sort of dehumanize her over a story like this. But maybe the man in the stairwell, it's a little bit easier to dehumanize him. And to see if you can exercise this muscle of not doing that. And to see if when you're out in the world, you can kind of, try your best to pay attention when you get to a place with someone who disagrees with you, just to not get to that point where you're lowering yourself to this kind of conversation where you're going to celebrate if they suffer. Like, we don't want to be those people, I understand, believe me, I understand. There's a lot of things that are happening in the world right now that make you want to pull your hair out. I am probably like, I don't know. I think I'm as liberal as, listen, it's no big shock. I live in Southern California. I'm a yoga teacher. I'm liberal, I have family members who feel very differently about the state of the world. And it is hard, and I don't give up. I don't stop trying, to have meaningful conversation, even though it's really hard, because I feel like the minute we throw in the towel, we're doomed. And that's really what I wanted to say in the context of this kind of like awful, set of things that happened, along with a lot of other amazing things that happened growing up in New York City. I love that I grew up in New York City. I treasure that I grew up in New York City. I got such a huge education in being a human being. And so it might feel like an offshoot or a strange turn to take, but it really is all connected, all the things that I'm talking about here, because you have to talk about the violence in the world and the really horrible things that happen sometimes, and then talk about empathy, right? Like that's kind of what I was trying to do, is to present a set of events that happened and people who did things that are, just horrendous by anyone's standards, and then talk about it in the framework of empathy, and I hope that that's been useful. I really do. I think that we need to not give up on each other, and I think that an advanced practice of just really being trying to evolve in your whatever kind of spiritual practice or growth you're experiencing or you're going through, to stretch yourself a little bit sometimes, to kind of really try to ask yourself, can I just sort of step back for a minute and rethink maybe the way I'm approaching this, that the minute that I find myself kind of you going yes, when someone I disagree with gets punished, I probably lost my way a little bit, yes, we want to fight the good fight. Yes, we want a better, more peaceful, sane world for all of us. Yes. That doesn't mean we have to turn into gloating school children when somebody gets what's coming to them. That's not what we're trying to do. And I thank you, as I always do, for having these conversations with me and for being willing to think about these things and just examine, your own relationship with this stuff. And that's part of self-study, right? That's part of svadhyaya, little yoga for you. That's part of it, is just getting to know yourself and being compassionate, but just noticing what happens for me. And, it's not a good feeling to be celebrating anyone's suffering. That's not a good feeling. So thank you for joining me.